Hi, I'm Scott Sinclair, Practice Director with the Enterprise Strategy Group, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Mike Leone, Jon Brown, and Gabe Knuth. And we're just back from Dell Technologies World, and we're going to talk about everything we saw at this year's event. Mike, let me start with you because I know you just wrote an article about the Dell AI factory. What did you see? What did you experience? And what did you think?
Yeah, I mean, as expected, right? AI took center stage as it has been for the last, year and a half or so. And look, a couple months back at NVIDIA GTC, Dell made an announcement in partnership with NVIDIA, and it was, the Dell AI factory with NVIDIA. And what we actually saw at this event was a higher level version of that story with the Dell AI factory. And really the whole premise behind this is, hey, look, organizations are in different stages of their AI journeys. Some need help on just identifying where they should be making investments and the use cases to pursue. Others are really exploring how to right-size deployments in an on-premises environment. So really the premise behind this Dell AI factory is to enable customers to build their own AI factories, obviously in partnership with Dell. And really what I really enjoy about this, it really served as a way to comprehensively speak to the entire Dell portfolio, right? It hits on all the different infrastructure offerings. It hits on all the different partnerships in the open ecosystem that they're bringing to the Dell AI factory. And then it really highlights the investment that they've been making in professional services as it relates to supporting Gen AI and AI initiatives, regardless of where they are in their journeys. So really powerful stuff. I could talk for a long time on this. I'll let some of the others chime in.
Well, just to comment, Mike, real quick before we get over to Jon and Gabe, is I just to echo a little bit of your sentiment. I love how Dell and NVIDIA are partnering to, in some ways, streamline deployment, offer people kind of an end-to-end kind of turnkey solution, but also offering organizations a little bit of flexibility and choice in terms of what models they leverage, what software they leverage, how they integrate their data, but also go after particular use cases. But in those turnkey solutions, Dell's offering, like, for example, solutions that allow you to deploy a digital assistant and get up to speed very quickly on that. As the infrastructure guy, one of the things that I found fascinating is, and this was a comment by the NVIDIA CEO, Jensen called it talking about sexy infrastructure, with the announcement of the PowerEdge XE9680L. Now, when this is a follow-on to the XE9680, which for those of you who are familiar with, is a Dell PowerEdge server that supports 8 NVIDIA GPUs. Now, this was announced at the end of 2022 and has had so much excitement and has been so successful that when Michael just mentioned it at the keynote, the crowd or the audience erupted with spontaneous applause, which I thought was fascinating. The new version, the L, is going to have liquid cooling in it in order to provide 8 GPUs in a little bit more dense form factor, or smaller form factor, which, Jon, I think leads me to you, which is, okay, you look at this from a sustainability standpoint. I'd love to get your thought on some of the things Dell's doing around sustainability. But as I think about liquid cooling, that kind of makes me think too, okay, how do we power and how do we support all these AI initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, there were two threads, right? AI, obvious, giant thread. But there was also a sustainability thread that permeated the entire DTW event. And for me, as a sustainability analyst, that was super refreshing to see. And to see, that they'd gone beyond the conceptual of like Project Luna, which is the laptop that's 100% recyclable, old news. They've had that for a couple of years. But it was cool to see them, operationalizing sustainability on the server side. We did see some progress with the server designs and looking at recycled materials. I did get to speak to Cassandra Garber, who is the vice president of ESG and sustainability, and I really grilled her about, hey, what about AI? We're doing a lot of great stuff over here. Love what you've done with the AI ops stuff and putting in, metrics for energy consumption that I can tell how much my storage workload is using, how much energy it's using, and optimize that. That's great. But AI, isn't it going to break all of that? And she had a great answer for that. And she basically said, yeah, but AI is also going to help us optimize energy usage much, much better. She wouldn't go out to say it's going to be a wash or we've got this settled, but it was great to see that, hey, we're thinking about this already. We're already going to be measuring that energy consumption. We're already putting out servers and management tools that are designed to handle this workload as efficiently as possible. So I'm optimistic about this, but I would be lying if I didn't say, hey, I'm a little nervous. We do have this existential crisis called Earth, and AI is really cool and shiny, but at the end of the day, we have a larger mission to do, and that is to get our sustainability ducks in a row. So I'm going to post the interview that I did with Cassandra, and you'll be able to hear it directly from her, what we talked about. But overall, my take on it, sustainability has become an operational principle within Dell, and their new end-to-end sustainability story is a great way to talk about what they're doing in the supply chain, as well as what they're doing for end users and end customers who are trying to meet their own climate goals. I suppose I'd give them a +1 for sustainability for this event.
Great to hear. I also like the idea of technology of innovation, helping to address some of the challenges that we all face in the existential crisis that you mentioned. Gabe, I feel bad that we've taken this long to get to you. Love to get your insight from, that end user perspective.
Yeah, well, all this stuff is super interesting, so don't feel bad. My main takeaway was, there were actually two big things happening in the endpoint world at the same time. One was obviously Dell Tech World, and if you were in the keynote there, you saw Michael Dell talking about Copilot plus PCs. What's interesting is that Copilot plus PCs had been announced about 10 minutes before that at a Microsoft event that was also happening at the same time. And so these AI PCs, or Copilot plus PCs, as the Microsoft sort of compatible or branded ones are called, were the star of the show from my perspective. I saw demos of Microsoft's Copilot Recall and from other things like Cephable, which is it uses head gestures as ways to interact with and control a computer. There were a lot of other things too, but I actually got to see and feel the devices too, which is something new. We've heard about these AI PCs and these things with advanced levels of AI compute built into them, but now we actually are starting to see and be able to touch these things. Dell announced 3 of them: the Latitude 7455 Plus, which is the business facing the commercial device for those things, but there's also the XPS 13 and the Inspiron 14. All of those are based on a Qualcomm Snapdragon processor, notably, so not an Intel processor, not AMD. Qualcomm actually had a pretty big presence there. Obviously, others are going to be providing those too. Intel, we expect, AMD, and so on. But Qualcomm was the sole AI PC supplier that was there at the show. And that was interesting to see just because, in the past, it's been an Intel and AMD show. I spoke with Qualcomm. I learned a lot about how Prism works, about how the x86 emulation, I should say, that's called Prism, works. I learned about how management works, how apps are going to be compatible, how machines are going to be deployed. Long story short, this is not the same Windows on ARM experiment that failed back in 2012 or 13. This is legit. And our enterprise apps are going to run, I think, in a lot of ways on these devices. So it'll be really interesting to see how far this goes. Last thing is that from a Dell perspective, what really stuck out to me is that Dell is really eating their own dog food when it comes to using AI internally. They're using it to support their call center users. They're recognizing real value in terms of customer satisfaction, support and repair costs, and things like that from their efforts. And overall, I think that they're really establishing themselves as a vendor that is, that has experience putting AI to use to help drive real business outcomes all the way down at the weeds. And so I think that's going to set them up to be a trusted advisor for their customers, not just in the areas where, you guys have been talking about, but also way down at the endpoint where, I like to say the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, Gabe, I really like that last point. I mean, on one hand, it's brilliant to see Dell showing about how AI is influencing their entire infrastructure portfolio and all the different innovations you're doing to help organizations with their own infrastructure. But, I think one of the things I would have liked to see is within the keynote is Dell talk a little bit more about their own AI journey. I know they had some of that in the sessions, but that's such a powerful message because they have done so much work in that space. That would have been, I think that would have provided a really valuable storyline as part of the keynote. In addition to that, I would have really liked to see Dell talk a little bit more about their services arm in the keynote. Again, they had that in the sessions, but I think Dell's doing some really fascinating things around AI services that I think they could have brought more to the forefront. With that, thank you guys so much for your insights, and thanks to our audience for listening.